Epstein, how did you first become friends? How did you meet? To some extent to stretch to say that as it were, we were close friends. I mean we were friends. Buckingham Palace is once again in turmoil, as King Charles takes the shocking step of dragging Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson to the Supreme Court. Having him step down and be stripped of his titles is something that is long delayed, and it is very appropriate. This is why King Charles is king. After a disturbing leaked email surfaced, the message reportedly containing explosive details about hidden royal dealings has sent shock waves through the monarchy and the British public alike. For years, Charles has tried to maintain the fragile dignity of the crown. Prince Andrew is the king's brother. So how could this documentary impact the monarchy? There's no doubt that Prince Andrew's friendship with Epstein still has the potential to hugely influence the reputation of the Mon. But this revelation may be the final straw. So what was in that email, and why has the king finally decided to act? The email that shook the palace. It started with something deceptively small, an email buried deep within the archives of royal history, quietly forgotten until now. Dated 2011, the message seemed ordinary at first glance, but its contents would soon rattle Buckingham Palace to its foundations. The email reportedly sent by Prince Andrew allegedly showed him contacting a Metropolitan Police officer asking for personal information about a young woman named Virginia Jew, then at the center of the explosive Jeffrey Epstein scandal. Her name had just surfaced publicly, and the photograph of Andrew with his arm around her had already left a stain on the monarchy's reputation that time could not fully wash away. Yet this newly unearthed message hinted at something darker, that a senior royal may have attempted to use official police channels to uncover private details about his accuser. If true, it was not merely a lapse in judgment, but an act that blurred the lines between privilege and power. The alleged request reportedly included Jewer's date of birth and even her U.S. Social Security number, details far too specific to be dismissed as curiosity. For investigators, it raised disturbing questions about intent. For the monarchy, it threatened to reopen a chapter it had fought desperately to close. When the email resurfaced in 2025, it didn't just reignite a scandal. It tore open old wounds that had barely begun to heal. Within the palace walls, whispers spread like wildfire. The Metropolitan Police swiftly confirmed they were reviewing the claims. And once again, the Duke of York found himself at the center of a storm he could not control. For King Charles, already navigating delicate public trust, the timing was catastrophic. Behind the formality of royal protocol, frustration and disbelief brewed. How much longer could the family absorb the damage? But the impact wasn't confined to official corridors. It struck hardest at home at Royal Lodge, where Prince Andrew continued to live alongside his former wife, Sarah Ferguson. For years, their unusual friendship had been a symbol of loyalty amid chaos. They shared not only a home, but a long, complicated history that had somehow endured scandal, divorce, and public scrutiny. Yet, this leak changed the tone entirely. Those close to Sarah described her reaction as furious and deeply shaken. The content of the email and what it revealed about Andrew's possible actions had reportedly left her both heartbroken and enraged. Her name and that of their daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, had been mentioned before in the Epstein files. Now, with this fresh revelation, she feared they would once again be dragged into the public's unforgiving glare. For Sarah, this was no longer about defending Andrew or shielding the royal image. It was about protecting her family. The emotions were raw, the trust fractured. Behind closed doors, arguments reportedly erupted. And as the shock waves reached the king himself, the decision came swiftly and publicly, a call for legal accountability. The palace that once closed ranks around its own was now confronting its most painful reckoning yet. The ghosts of 2011 had returned, and this time King Charles wasn't looking away. So how did Sarah Ferguson transform from loyal defender to fearless challenger? And what secret discovery pushed her to defy the crown? Stay tuned. The breaking point inside the palace. When the leaked email reached the front pages, it was more than just another headline about Prince Andrew. It was a silence that stole the spotlight. Sarah Ferguson, once his most vocal defender, suddenly vanished from public view. For a woman who had stood beside her ex-husband through humiliation, scandal, and years of suspicion, her quiet withdrawal spoke louder than any royal statement could. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was the sound of a long-held loyalty beginning to break. Behind the palace walls, murmurs began to spread. Whispers that Sarah, the Duchess of York, was seeking legal advice about an extraordinary move taking Prince Andrew to the Supreme Court. To the outside world, the idea seemed absurd, even sensational. But to those who knew the history, it made chilling sense. Sarah had spent decades painstakingly rebuilding her public image after her divorce, clawing her way back from the ridicule of tabloid headlines, from financial struggles, and from years of being dismissed as the fallen duchess. Every step she took in business, charity, and publishing had been a battle to stand on her own. But now, one resurfaced email threatened to destroy it all. The message, already casting Andrew in a deeply troubling light, carried implications that stretched far beyond him. It hinted at entanglements, names, meetings, and associations that could stain not just the Duke, but Sarah and their daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. Reports began circulating that her family's names had been mentioned in older correspondence linked to Jeffrey Epstein, even suggesting that Sarah and the girls had once visited Epstein after his release. She fiercely denied it, but denial couldn't erase the shadow of suspicion that now loomed larger than ever. For Sarah, this wasn't just about reputation. It was personal betrayal. She had stood by Andrew when few others would. She had defended him, absorbed the public scorn, and believed that loyalty would one day bring peace. Instead, she now found herself facing the fallout from choices she never made. The leaked email didn't just expose Andrew's alleged behavior. It exposed her vulnerability, her career as an author and advocate, her work with charities, even her credibility as a public figure. All of it risked being dragged into the scandal's undertow. Those close to her described a woman transformed, furious, resolute, and unwilling to be the collateral damage of another royal disaster. Legal advisers reportedly laid out her options, from protecting her professional image to pursuing a formal claim if Andrew's conduct had caused reputational harm. But friends insisted her motive wasn't revenge or money. It was self-preservation and perhaps something deeper. A message that even within the monarchy's shadows, accountability could no longer be avoided. And yet the situation spiraled far beyond personal conflict. When word of Sarah's intentions reached King Charles, the tone inside Buckingham Palace shifted sharply. What had begun as a family crisis was now a matter of institutional survival. The monarch, already burdened by his brother's controversies, saw the storm forming not outside, but within his own walls. The possibility of a public legal clash between two senior royals threatened to drag the monarchy into unprecedented scandal. And so, for the first time, the king himself stepped in, summoning both Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson to answer before the law. Within hours, the whispers turned to shock. The palace that once protected its own was now preparing to put two of its most controversial figures before the Supreme Court. For Andrew and Sarah, the reckoning they had long evaded had finally arrived, and this time it was the king who demanded answers. But how did one digital trail, buried for years, suddenly resurface with evidence powerful enough to corner both Andrew and Sarah before the king himself? The digital trail that exposed the royals. King Charles had remained silent for as long as he could. For months he had watched from a measured distance as his brother's past scandals flickered in and out of public conversation, each time threatening to cast new shadows over the crown. But now, silence was no longer an option. Sitting in the quiet of his private study, Charles reportedly broke that silence with a single statement that cut through the tension like a blade. "This cannot go on." His words marked a turning point. For the first time, the monarch's patience had run dry. What had begun as private tension inside Royal Lodge, the sprawling Windsor estate that Prince Andrew shared with Sarah Ferguson, was now spiraling into open chaos. Whispers about Sarah's frustration and possible legal action had leaked to the press, sending the tabloids into a frenzy. But it wasn't just gossip that alarmed the king. Behind the noise, investigative journalists and online researchers had started to uncover a disturbing trail of digital evidence, threads the palace had worked tirelessly to erase. It began as before with that single email from 2011, the one that allegedly showed Andrew asking a Metropolitan Police officer for private details about Virginia Jew. But as journalists dug deeper, they found more. Fragments of correspondence buried in digital archives, unsealed case references, and old Epstein-related files reappearing on online forums. Piece by piece, timelines were being rebuilt. Some messages appeared to involve royal aides. Others referenced meetings that had never been made public. What emerged was a pattern, a network of quiet communications that painted an uncomfortable picture of access, secrecy, and influence. The more they uncovered, the more the questions grew. Who else had known about these exchanges? How far had the royal connections reached? And crucially, had Sarah Ferguson herself been aware of more than she admitted? For the king, the implications were devastating. It wasn't just about Andrew anymore. Some of the documents revealed overlapping dates, times when Sarah and their daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, were reportedly in New York, coinciding with known visits linked to Epstein's associates. There was no proof of wrongdoing, but the coincidences alone were enough to reignite suspicion. The optics were disastrous, and in the court of public opinion, coincidence often carried the weight of guilt. For Sarah, the discovery was unbearable. Sources close to her revealed she had stumbled upon evidence suggesting her family's names appeared far more frequently in these digital traces than she ever imagined. If true, it would explain her fury, and her sudden determination to distance herself, even if that meant standing against Andrew. What had begun as his scandal had now morphed in her eyes into a betrayal that endangered their daughters' futures. Inside Royal Lodge, arguments erupted behind closed doors. But outside, the walls were closing in. Screenshots spread online. Reporters gathered at the gates. The quiet refuge that once shielded the Duke and Duchess from scrutiny was dissolving into chaos. When word of these latest revelations reached Buckingham Palace, King Charles saw no path left but confrontation. The monarchy could no longer rely on silence or damage control. It was time, he decided, to bring everything into the open through the only institution that stood above reputation and rumor, the law. Now, both Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson were summoned before the Supreme Court. To the public, it was shocking. To the king, it was necessary. After years of silence, denial, and quiet negotiations, accountability had finally come knocking at the gates of Royal Lodge. And this time it bore the royal seal of the crown itself. And what could have pushed King Charles to take the unimaginable step, turning royal blood into defendants beneath his own crown's command? Keep watching. The monarch's dilemma. By the time the leaked emails consumed every front page, Buckingham Palace was no longer a symbol of quiet order. It was a fortress under siege. Behind the gilded doors, tension hung thick in the air. Phones rang relentlessly. Advisors moved in hurried steps through the marble corridors, their whispers echoing off the walls that had witnessed centuries of royal crises. But never one quite like this. What had started as a single email scandal had now spiraled into a storm threatening not just reputations but the very credibility of the monarchy itself. King Charles sat at the center of it all, surrounded by aides, private secretaries, and weary legal counsel. The normally composed palace press office was drowning in midnight strategy sessions and panicked calls with media executives. Every outlet wanted answers. Every rumor demanded a response, and every silence, no matter how brief, was interpreted as guilt. The king's instruction was simple: contain the damage, preserve the crown, but for the first time even that seemed out of reach. Inside those late-night meetings, Prince William's voice reportedly cut through the noise, calm but firm. He was said to have urged his father to abandon the palace's long tradition of silence. No more quiet cover-ups, he reportedly told senior staff, warning that secrecy had become the monarchy's greatest weakness. His call for transparency, at least as much as royal protocol would allow, revealed a growing generational rift. The old guard clung to discretion, believing that time and dignity could outlast scandal. But William, shaped by a modern world of instant headlines and public accountability, saw the danger in waiting. The longer they hid, the deeper the suspicion grew. For King Charles, the crisis had become deeply personal. His patience with Prince Andrew had worn thin long before the email resurfaced. But this was different. The accusations were not only legal in nature, but morale, striking at the heart of what the monarchy claimed to represent. And now, with Sarah Ferguson's rumoured legal intentions looming like a sword over the family, the threat was no longer confined to Andrew alone. Both he and Sarah were now seen as liabilities, potential catalysts for a scandal that could fracture what little unity the royal family had left. Reports from within the palace painted a picture of a monarch torn between loyalty and duty. To defend his brother meant risking public outrage, and the collapse of trust the crown had struggled to rebuild. To let him fall, however, would be to publicly admit that the royal institution was not immune to accountability, a precedent few before him had dared to set. The Queen's old advisers urged caution. The younger courtiers whispered of decisive action. And somewhere between those two worlds, Charles sat in silence, realizing that every choice would leave a scar. Meanwhile, Sarah Ferguson's next move remained a mystery. Her legal consultations were said to be intensifying, her tone shifting from defensive to defiant. Would she truly take this battle to court, exposing royal records, emails, and private dealings? Or would a quiet settlement be arranged in the shadows to preserve what little peace remained? No one knew, not even the king. But one fact had become undeniable. The royal walls of secrecy, once impenetrable, were cracking. And as King Charles looked upon the wreckage of trust within his own family, one truth pressed down on him with unrelenting weight. If this fire wasn't contained soon, it wouldn't just consume Andrew and Sarah. It could burn straight through the monarchy itself. Now, what hidden truth still lurked in the ashes? And could this be the moment King Charles's crown finally trembles? Stay with us, the shadow that wouldn't die. King Charles was the first to break the silence. After weeks of watching the headlines spiral out of control, he reportedly called an emergency meeting inside Buckingham Palace. His voice, calm but firm, carried the weight of a monarch who had reached his limit. We can no longer protect what the world believes is already lost, he said, looking across the table at his advisers. The message was clear. The crown itself was now on trial. The story of Jeffrey Epstein had haunted the royal family for years. But for Prince Andrew, it had never been a passing storm. It became the shadow that defined him, the stain that clung no matter how many statements, interviews, or denials followed. His connection to Epstein, once dismissed as ill-judged but not illegal, had now evolved into something darker, something that refused to fade. The The scandal had first exploded back in 2010 when photographs of Andrew walking with Epstein through New York's Central Park went viral, triggering outrage across Britain. At the time, the palace dismissed it as poor judgment. But with the resurfacing of the 2011 email, the one allegedly showing Andrew asking a Metropolitan Police officer for personal details about Virginia Jew, the entire narrative came crashing back. This was no longer about appearances or old friendships. The leaked message appeared to show a calculated attempt to access confidential information about the very woman who had accused him of misconduct. The contents were shockingly specific, containing details that hinted at a coordinated effort to undermine Joffrey's credibility. To critics, it was a disturbing abuse of influence. To Andrew's defenders, it was a message taken out of context, but the damage was already done. The Metropolitan Police confirmed they were reviewing the claims. Lawmakers demanded full transparency, and human rights campaigners called for Parliament to revisit centuries-old laws shielding royals from accountability. The question on everyone's lips was the one King Charles could no longer ignore. Could the monarchy survive another storm of secrecy? Within days, the scandal widened. Old suspicions resurfaced, not just about Andrew's conduct, but about who else might have known. That's when Sarah Ferguson's name returned to the spotlight. The Mail on Sunday published excerpts of an email allegedly written by Epstein to his lawyer in 2011, claiming that Sarah was the first to celebrate my release. He even referenced supposed visits from the Duchess of York and her daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. Sarah swiftly denied the claims, insisting neither she nor her daughters ever visited Epstein. Yet the rumor spread like wildfire, blurring fact and speculation into a single narrative of guilt by association. For Sarah, it was a devastating blow. After decades spent rebuilding her public image, she now faced accusations that risked undoing it all. To the public, she was no longer the woman who had once stood by Andrew. She was part of his shadow. Inside the palace, the fear was palpable. Senior aides warned that every new revelation pulled the monarchy deeper into the past. It was trying to escape. King Charles, already grappling with the weight of modernizing the institution, now found himself confronting the monarchy's oldest curse, the belief that privilege could silence consequence. And as the leaked emails spread across the internet, igniting both outrage and curiosity, one question echoed through the palace halls and the nation beyond. Had the line between protection and complicity finally been crossed? And now, as the storm closes in, could this be the moment King Charles is forced to choose between family loyalty and royal survival? Stay glued. The King's breaking point. It began behind closed doors, a quiet storm gathering inside Buckingham Palace. King Charles sat at the long mahogany table. Papers spread before him, the leaked email printed in stark black and white. His voice, calm but edged with disbelief, broke the silence. This cannot go unanswered. What followed was not a family meeting. It was a reckoning. For years, Charles had tolerated the whispers around his brother, Prince Andrew, the headlines, the accusations, the tarnished friendships. But this time was different. The newly leaked 2011 email had reignited the Epstein scandal with frightening precision. It wasn't a rumor anymore. It was evidence. The message appeared to link Andrew directly to efforts aimed at gathering damaging information about Virginia Jew, the woman whose accusations had nearly destroyed his reputation. The contents were explicit enough to suggest intent, and that was what enraged the king most. Palace aides described those early hours as a controlled emergency. Phones rang nonstop, legal advisors were summoned, and senior courtiers were ordered to handle the situation with absolute discretion. Yet, for all the frantic coordination, one fact remained impossible to ignore: Sarah Ferguson's name had also resurfaced. Her mention in a separate 2011 correspondence from Epstein to his lawyer, boasting that the Duchess had been the first to celebrate his release, turned the scandal from personal shame to institutional crisis. For Charles that was the final blow. He saw it not as coincidence, but as collusion, or at the very least negligence that had placed the monarchy in peril. To the king this wasn't just about reputation. It was about the crown itself being compromised by those closest to him. Within hours he summoned both Andrew and Sarah to a private meeting. According to one insider, the king's tone was uncharacteristically sharp, cold, deliberate, and laced with disappointment. "I cannot defend what I do not trust," he reportedly said. The meeting stretched for hours. By the end, one decision had been made. The matter would go beyond palace walls. The monarchy would no longer shield its own. King Charles instructed his legal team to prepare for Supreme Court proceedings, a move that stunned even his closest advisers. It was a historic gesture, a sitting monarch referring members of his own family to the nation's highest court. Yet Charles insisted it was necessary. The crown, he said, must be above suspicion, not beneath silence. As the news quietly spread through Westminster, the implications became clear. This was no longer a palace scandal. It was a constitutional crisis. Parliamentarians began to whisper about precedent, about the future of royal immunity, about whether Andrew and Sarah's alleged actions could expose weaknesses in the monarchy's legal protections. Inside the palace, the atmosphere grew heavier by the hour. Sarah Ferguson, already devastated by years of public scrutiny, was reportedly distraught. Andrew, pale and withdrawn, refused to comment, claiming the email had been taken out of context. But the king's patience had run out. Outside the palace gates, reporters gathered like vultures. The public wanted answers. The press wanted accountability, and the monarchy, already fragile in the post-Elizabethan era, stood at the edge of another storm. King Charles had drawn his line, but the question was, could even a king control what came next, the breaking of royal immunity? King Charles began the meeting with words no monarch had ever dared to utter in public or private. "We can no longer protect what we cannot defend." His voice, measured but resolute, filled the dimly lit study, where senior advisers waited in uneasy silence. The scandal surrounding Prince Andrew had once again exploded into national outrage, and this time the storm had spread far beyond Buckingham Palace. What began as a family crisis had now reached Westminster, the seat of British power, and the king knew the walls were closing in. For years, Parliament had avoided stepping into royal affairs, restrained by centuries-old customs that shielded the monarchy from direct scrutiny. But the leaked email, the one allegedly tying Andrew to efforts to discredit Virginia, had crossed a line that tradition could no longer conceal. The public was outraged, the media relentless, and now even lawmakers were openly defying royal boundaries. To them, this wasn't about scandal anymore. It was about justice. Labour MP Rachel Maskell from York Central, long outspoken about accountability in the royal household, revived her 2022 removal of Titles Bill. This time, her message carried an unmistakable edge. Every time the story resurfaces, she declared, it re-traumatizes victims and destroys public faith. The monarchy must not be exempt from consequence. Her bill proposed that either Parliament or the monarch himself could strip royal titles in cases of disgrace or misconduct, a move that just years earlier would have been unthinkable. Soon other voices joined the storm. Ed Mibben described the leaked email as deeply troubling, demanding an inquiry into whether there had been any interference with police investigations. Nadia Whittam of Nottingham East went further, accusing the palace of hiding behind vague statements and voluntary retreats. Even within the House of Lords, a chamber typically cautious about royal criticism, the mood shifted. Labour peer George Fulkeys called for a review of the outdated restrictions that prevented Parliament from holding royals accountable. Accountability, he said bluntly, must extend to all, even those born into privilege. In this rising tide, the monarchy's long-guarded secrets began to look less like tradition and more like evasion. MP questioned why royal finances remained exempt from transparency laws, why wills were sealed in perpetuity, and why public funds could be used to maintain properties like the Royal Lodge, still occupied by Prince Andrew. The debate had evolved into something far larger than one man's disgrace. It was now about the future of monarchy itself, and whether it could coexist with modern expectations of accountability. Meanwhile, Sarah Ferguson, once fiercely loyal to Andrew, found herself entangled in the widening circle of suspicion. Her rumored decision to consult legal counsel, initially dismissed as personal, now seemed like a pivotal lack of self-preservation. To the public, it appeared as if those closest to Andrew were turning away. To King Charles it was a confirmation of something darker, a family unraveling under the weight of its own silence. Inside the palace, aides scrambled to contain the fallout, but their efforts only deepened the impression of secrecy. The king's vision of a modern, transparent monarchy was being put to the test like never before. Westminster was no longer whispering. It was demanding answers. And as the tension between Crown and Parliament reached a boiling point, all eyes turned toward the Royal Lodge. In this quiet estate, Andrew and Sarah had once found refuge, now standing as the epicenter of a storm that could redefine the very meaning of royal immunity. So what do you think? Is King Charles's move to drag Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson before the Supreme Court a bold stand for justice or a desperate bid to save the Crown's crumbling image? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unfolding royal revelations.